Harlem, New York, Thursday, July 9th, 1931, 11:47 a.m. p.m. The summer heat had turned Lenox Avenue into a pressure cooker. Even at midnight, men stood on corners in rolled-up sleeves, watching every car that slowed too much. Jazz leaked from open windows like smoke. Streetlights shimmered on sweat and pavement. And outside a quiet social club that wasn't a club at all, a black Packard rolled to the curb. It wasn't supposed to be there. Not tonight. Not with those plates. Not with the kind of men stepping out. 3 Italians. Sharp suits. Stiff hats. Eyes too cold for Harlem. They walked like they didn't have to ask permission to breathe. But Harlem wasn't Chicago, and the man waiting for them already knew their names. Inside the club, behind a locked door and a curtain that blocked the streetlight, Bumpy Johnson sat at the end of a long table with a glass of bourbon untouched in front of him. He didn't look nervous. He looked patient, like the room was his, like time was his. At his side stood a young runner named Calvin Cal Briggs 22, skinny, quick hands, quick eyes, trying hard not to show fear. Cal had a problem nobody in the room could solve for him. His mother was sick tuberculosis, coughing blood into rags that were already stained brown. A doctor downtown wanted money up front for medicine, and Cal had no money. That's why he'd agreed to run messages for Bumpy in the first place. Not for pride, not for crime, for survival. Tonight, survival was about to ask Cal a question with teeth. The door opened. The 3 Italians entered without smiling. The one in the center, slick hair, a scar line near his jaw, took off his hat like he was doing Harlem a favor. "My name's Vito Carlucci," he said, voice calm. "We're here on business from Mr. Capone." The room didn't move. Nobody offered a chair. Bumpy didn't stand. He didn't even nod. He simply looked at the men like a judge reading charges. "Capone," Bumpy repeated softly, like tasting something bitter. "He sent you." Vito slid a folded paper onto the table, thick, official-looking, almost insulting. A contract. Roots. Numbers. Percentages. A demand dressed as a deal. "This is simple," Vito said. "Chicago is expanding. Harlem is profitable. Mr. Capone is willing to be respectful. He tapped the paper once, but he expects cooperation." Cal swallowed. He'd seen deals before, but this wasn't a deal. This was a leash. Bumpy finally leaned forward, slow, deliberate, and placed 2 fingers on the paper like it was dirty. "And if I don't cooperate?" he asked. Vito didn't blink. "Then we stop asking." A silence fell so heavy even the club's back room fan sounded loud. Cal's hands tightened around the message envelope in his pocket. His own job tonight. A delivery that could decide whether his mother lived another week. Bumpy looked up at Vito. A faint smile crossed his face, small, controlled. Then Bumpy reached under the table. Cal's heart jumped. But Bumpy didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a matchbook. He struck it. And in front of Capone's men, he lit the corner of the contract. The flame ate the paper like it had been waiting for permission. Vito's eyes widened. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, stepping forward. Bumpy held the burning contract over the ashtray and let it drop like trash. "I'm answering you," Bumpy said, voice quiet. "This is Harlem. Your boss doesn't own air here." Vito's face hardened. "You're making a mistake." Bumpy stood now, still calm, still measured. "No," he said. "You did. You brought Capone's name into my house like it was protection." Bumpy leaned closer to Vito, their faces only inches apart. "Tell your boss something for me," Bumpy whispered. "If he wants Harlem, he better come himself." Vito stared, humiliated, furious, then nodded sharply to his men. They turned to leave, but as they reached the door, Cal's stomach dropped. Because outside, the street noise changed. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was footsteps. Too many. And then a voice from the doorway, one of Bumpy's. "Look out," slow and urgent. "Bumpy!" "There's cars everywhere." Bumpy didn't look surprised. He looked ready. Cal realized the truth in that moment. Capone didn't send these men to negotiate. He sent them to mark the room. And now Harlem was about to make sure they never reported back. Bumpy turned slightly, just enough to glance at Cal. And Cal understood what that glance meant. A choice. Loyalty or survival. Because whatever was coming next, someone was going to die in the street tonight. And Cal might be the one forced to start it. Harlem, New York, Thursday, July 9th, 1931. 11:58 a.m. p.m. The room didn't explode into shouting. That's what made it terrifying. Men in Bumpy's circle didn't panic loudly. They didn't flinch. Panic was a luxury for people with nothing to lose. Instead, every man in the club moved with quiet purpose, chairs sliding back, hands disappearing into coats, eyes locking onto the door like it was a gun barrel pointed inward. Calvin Cal Briggs stayed frozen. Because he wasn't built for this. Not really. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't even a real gangster, not in his bones. He was a Harlem kid who'd spent most of his life dodging trouble, running errands, carrying groceries, lying to his mother about where the money came from. But now the air was thick with it, violence waiting just outside the walls. And Cal's chest tightened for one simple reason. His mother was counting on him. She was upstairs in their small apartment near St. Nicholas Avenue, lying on a mattress that smelled like cough syrup and old sweat. Every night she pretended she wasn't scared. Every day she got thinner. The doctor, down to an Irishman who didn't like black patients and made it clear with his eyes, had given Cal a number. $18. $18 for medicine strong enough to slow the illness. Cal had managed to get 12. He needed the other 6 by morning, or his mother would lose her place on the list like she was a piece of bad paperwork. That's why he'd taken Bumpy's offer. Bumpy didn't recruit him with romance. He recruited him with reality. "You're quick," Bumpy told him weeks ago. "Quick boys live longer in Harlem. And quick boys get paid." Cal didn't ask questions then. Because when you're hungry, you don't ask where the bread came from. You just eat. Tonight, Cal was supposed to deliver an envelope to a man named Reverend Amos Klein, a preacher who'd been quietly laundering protection money through church donations. The Reverend acted holy on Sundays and acted terrified every other day. The envelope contained cash and a message. A message meant to keep the neighborhood calm, because when Harlem got nervous, people started shooting the wrong people. But now the plan was shattered, because Capone's men had walked into Bumpy's house like they owned the floorboards. And Bumpy had burned their contract like it was garbage. Outside, the lookout's voice came again, sharper this time. 2 cars just pulled up behind the Packard. "They're boxing the block." Cal felt his mouth go dry. That wasn't intimidation. That wasn't a warning. That was a trap closing. Bumpy turned to his top man, Little Leon Mercer, a thick-shouldered enforcer with a crooked nose and eyes that never seemed to blink. Leon leaned close and spoke low. "They got more than 3, Bump." "I saw at least 8. Might be more in the shadows." Bumpy nodded like he already knew. Then he looked at Cal, and Cal felt that look like a hand on his throat. Because Bumpy's eyes didn't ask questions. They gave commands. "Cal," Bumpy said quietly, "you still got that envelope?" Cal's fingers touched his pocket without thinking. "Yes, sir." Bumpy stepped closer. "Good. Because you're taking it now." Cal blinked. "Now?" Bumpy's voice stayed calm. "Now." Cal tried to keep control of his breathing. "There's cars outside, Mr. Johnson." "I know." Cal swallowed again. "They'll see me." Bumpy leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice so only Cal could hear. "That's why it has to be you." Cal's heart hammered. He wanted to say no. He wanted to scream that he didn't sign up for this. He signed up for money, for medicine, for survival. But Bumpy's hand rested gently on Cal's shoulder, not friendly, possessive. "You told me you want your mother to live," Bumpy said. Cal's throat tightened. "Yes." "Then listen close," Bumpy continued. "Tonight decides if Harlem stays Harlem. If Capone thinks he can send boys here and make demands, then tomorrow it'll be soldiers. Next week it'll be bodies. And your mama will be coughing while Chicago counts Harlem's dollars." Bumpy paused. Then came the real strike, the one that turned Cal's blood cold. "If you run for me tonight," Bumpy whispered, "that doctor gets paid. First thing in the morning." Cal stared at him. It wasn't generosity. It was leverage. Bumpy was offering Cal the one thing he couldn't refuse. Life. Cal tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "What do you want me to do?" Bumpy's eyes shifted to the door. "Walk out like you belong. Cross the street." Deliver that envelope to Reverend Klein. Cal swallowed. And if Capone's men stop me? Bumpy didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward the window where dim streetlight leaked through the curtain. Cars, shadows, men waiting. Then Bumpy said, almost gently, "Then you decide who you are." Cal felt the floor tilt beneath him, because he finally understood the trap. It wasn't just Capone's men outside. It was Bumpy's test. A moral knife held to his throat. Loyalty or survival. And the worst part? Cal realized survival might require him to become something he hated. Bumpy reached into his own coat and produced something small. He held it out to Cal. A pistol, dark steel, cold. Cal didn't take it at first. He just stared, horrified. Bumpy's voice lowered to a final whisper. "Your mother needs you alive, Cal." Cal's hand trembled as he reached for the gun. And in that moment, he became part of the story for real. Because when Cal stepped toward that door, he wasn't just delivering money. He was walking into a street full of men who had been sent by Al Capone, and men who were waiting for permission to make them disappear. Harlem, Friday, July 10th, 1931, 12:06 p.m. a.m. Cal stepped out of the social club like he'd done it 1,000 times. Not fast, not slow, just normal. That was the first lesson Bumpy's world demanded. If you look guilty, you die first. The night air hit him like a wet cloth. Hot, heavy, smelling of cigarettes and street food and summer trash. Across the street, the block looked the same as always. But Cal felt it, the wrongness. 2 cars sat with their lights off, one near the curb, another half hidden at the far end of the block. No music, no laughter, no drunk men stumbling home. Just silhouettes, watching, waiting. Cal kept his head level and started walking. The envelope pressed against his ribs like a heartbeat. The pistol in his pocket felt heavier than the envelope. Like it wasn't metal-like, it was a decision. Halfway down the sidewalk, he heard a soft step behind him. Not rushed, controlled. He didn't turn. He couldn't. Because the moment you turned, they knew you were afraid. He kept walking. Then a voice came from the darkness beside a stoop. "Yo, Cal." Cal's blood iced. He recognized that voice before the speaker stepped into the streetlight. Eddie spoke Mallory. Not Irish mob, not Italian. Harlem. A local hustler with a thin mustache, a cheap fedora, and eyes that always looked like they were calculating. Spoke used to run errands for Bumpy too, until Bumpy stopped trusting him. And in Harlem, when Bumpy stopped trusting you, everybody noticed. Cal forced his face into something neutral. "Spoke," he said, trying not to sound shaken. Spoke smiled like an old friend, but he didn't come closer. He stayed in the shadow like he belonged to it. "You out late," Spoke said. Cal shrugged. "Work." Spoke chuckled softly. "Yeah, I heard you got promoted." Cal's throat tightened. How did he know? Spoke took a step, just enough for the streetlight to catch the edge of his grin. "Be careful who you work for, kid," Spoke said. "Some men don't pay you in money." Cal tried to keep his voice steady. "What you talking about?" Spoke glanced past Cal toward the social club. Then he looked back at Cal with a slow, deliberate stare. "Chicago's in town," he said. "And Chicago ain't here for conversation." Cal felt his stomach twist. Spoke wasn't warning him. Spoke was enjoying this. "Move," Cal said, sharper now. "I got somewhere to be." Spoke held up both hands, mock innocent. "I'm just being neighborly," he said. "Matter of fact, I can walk with you." Cal's chest tightened. "No." Spoke's smile didn't fade. "That's not a request," he said quietly. And that was when Cal saw it movement at the edge of the block. A man stepped from behind one of the dark cars. Then another. Not Harlem boys. Not locals. Their suits were too clean. Their posture too rigid. Capone's men. They weren't just watching. They were closing. Cal's breath shortened, but his feet kept moving one step, then another. Spoke walked alongside him now, staying close enough that Cal could smell his cologne cheap and sharp. "You know what's funny?" Spoke murmured. "Capone didn't send those boys to talk to Bumpy. He sent them to see who Bumpy trusts." Cal stared ahead. Spoke continued, voice like a knife sliding out slow. And guess who's walking out of Bumpy's place at the worst possible time? Cal felt heat flare behind his eyes. So you setting me up? Cal hissed. Spoke laughed under his breath. Kid, you ain't important enough to set up, he said. You're important enough to use. They reached the corner where Cal needed to turn toward the church. But the moment Cal angled his body, two of the Italian men stepped out fully, blocking the sidewalk ahead. One of them held a cigarette. The glow lit the underside of his face, making his smile look like a cut. Evening, the Italian said politely. You Calvin Briggs? Cal's heart slammed. Spoke didn't move. He just watched like this was a show he'd paid to see. Cal swallowed hard. I don't know what you talking about. The Italian smiled wider. We do, he said. We know where you sleep. We know where your mother coughs. Cal froze. His skin went cold all the way down to his fingers. The man leaned in closer. You're gonna do something for us, he said softly. And then you're gonna go home like a good boy. Cal's hands trembled inside his pockets, one gripping the envelope, the other touching the pistol. His mind raced. If he pulls the gun, they kill him. If he doesn't, they use him. The Italian nodded toward the envelope. Bumpy got you carrying money, yeah? He asked. We want that envelope. Cal's throat tightened. No. Spoke finally spoke again, voice low and poisonous. Don't be stupid, he said. Give it to M. Live. Cal turned his eyes slightly just enough to look at Spoke. And that's when he understood the betrayal fully. Spoke wasn't just a hustler. Spoke was the leak. He'd told Chicago everything who Bumpy trusted, who carried what, who could be grabbed in the street without starting a war. And now Cal was the proof. The Italian stepped closer and reached out. Envelope, he repeated. Cal's pulse roared in his ears. And behind him down the block he heard another sound. A car door opening, then footsteps. Fast. Multiple. Harlem footsteps. Bumpy's men. But Cal couldn't turn to look, because if he did, the Italians would know Bumpy was coming. Cal had seconds. Give up the envelope and doom Harlem's calm. Refuse and doom himself, and maybe his mother. And Spoke leaned in close enough to whisper into Cal's ear. They told me they'll pay me $50 if you die. Cal's eyes widened. $50. That was more than his doctor bill, more than his mother's medicine. Spoke had sold him for a price Cal almost understood. Almost. The Italian's hand grabbed the edge of Cal's coat, and Cal finally realized this wasn't just about money. This was about a message. If Capone could steal a delivery out of Bumpy's hand, then Bumpy could be humiliated in front of Harlem. And humiliation was the one thing Bumpy couldn't afford. Cal's fingers tightened on the pistol. But before he could move, a voice thundered from behind the Italians, hard and commanding. Get your hands off that boy. The Italians snapped their heads. Spoke's smile vanished. Because stepping into the streetlight was Leon Mercer, and behind him came 6 Harlem men with guns already drawn. The street turned into a silent battlefield. And Cal, trapped in the middle, realized something worse than fear. Bumpy Johnson had arrived, and he was not here to negotiate. Harlem, Friday, July 10th, 1931, 12:09 p.m. a.m. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. It wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. The Italians were trained men, Capone's men. They'd killed before. But Harlem's streetlight was exposing them, and suddenly their control wasn't control anymore. Leon Mercer stood with his pistol up but steady, like the gun was part of his hand. Back away, Leon ordered. One of the Italians, shorter, younger, didn't listen. He stepped behind Cal and shoved a revolver against the back of Cal's ribs. Cal sucked in air so fast it burned. The Italian hissed, "Tell them to drop their guns." Cal's mind tried to sprint, but his body froze. Then Leon's voice changed lower, deadlier. "You put that gun on him, you die first." The Italian pressed harder. Cal felt the metal bruise through his shirt. And in that moment, Cal realized something brutal. These men weren't leaving tonight. Not because Harlem was strong. Because Chicago had already decided what this night was for. The streetlight caught another figure stepping forward, now tall, clean suit, slick hair, scar line at the jaw. Vito Carlucci. He looked past Leon and smiled like he was greeting a business partner. "Mercer," Vito called out. Tell Bumpy to come out. This is between bosses. Leon didn't blink. This ain't between bosses, he said coldly. This is between you and the ground. Vito chuckled, and the sound made Cal sick. Then Vito raised his voice, speaking toward the club without even looking at it. Bumpy, he called, your little runner got brave. Let's see if you got the courage to watch him bleed. Cal's stomach dropped, because the words weren't meant for Leon. They were meant for Bumpy. They were bait, and bait meant a hook was already in the water. Leon took a step forward. Last warning, Leon said, voice hard. Let the boy go. Vito held his palms out, relaxed. Let him go, he repeated. Sure, I'm not unreasonable. Then Vito turned slightly to the Italian holding Cal. The man loosened his grip just a fraction. Cal felt the pressure ease and thought, stupidly, maybe this is ending. Then Vito looked back at Leon and smiled. But first, Vito said, I want something true. Leon's jaw tightened. What? Vito's smile widened. I want you to tell me something, he said. You Harlem boys keep acting like Bumpy's a king. Like he ain't just another thief with better manners. Leon didn't answer. Vito leaned forward, eyes glittering. Tell me, Vito said softly, how many of your men would die for him when Chicago offers a better deal? Cal felt Leon stiffen, and in that split second the twist happened. A gunshot cracked from across the street, not from Chicago, not from Harlem, from somewhere higher. A window, a rooftop. The shot was clean, precise. It hit one of Leon's men right in the throat. Blood sprayed in the streetlight like paint. The man dropped without even screaming, hands clawing at air. Everyone jerked. Harlem guns swung upward. Chicago men flinched, then smiled. Because that shot proved the truth. There was a sniper, and he wasn't aiming at Chicago. He was aiming at Harlem. Leon barked, "Roof! Roof!" 2 more shots snapped through the night. One bullet shattered a car window. Another punched into the sidewalk inches from Leon's foot. Now the whole block understood it at once. This wasn't a street ambush. This was an execution setup. Capone's men weren't meant to win the gunfight. They were meant to hold the street long enough for the sniper to do his work. And Leon realized it too late. Harlem boys were pinned in the open. Chicago boys had cover near the cars. And Cal was still trapped in the middle like a human shield. Vito shouted with cold confidence, "Drop your guns, Mercer, or the next shot hits the boy." Cal's lungs refused to work. He wanted to run, but any movement meant a bullet through his spine. Leon's eyes flicked to Cal. Not pity, strategy. And Cal felt it like a slap. Cal wasn't a person right now. He was leverage. Another shot cracked. This one hit Leon's hat brim, tearing felt. Leon ducked instinctively, teeth clenched. Now Harlem was truly in danger. One more shot, one more body, Harlem would panic and spray bullets everywhere. And Capone would get exactly what he wanted. Harlem killing Harlem under Chicago's spotlight. That was humiliation. That was headlines. That was the beginning of ownership. Then something worse happened. Spoke Mallory, standing back near the shadows, stepped forward with his hands raised like he was surrendering. "Wait," Spoke shouted. Leon snapped his gun toward him. Spoke raised his voice, desperate but excited. "I can fix this," Spoke yelled. "I can fix it." Vito turned his head slowly and smiled, because Spoke wasn't interrupting. He was delivering. Spoke pointed at the social club. "Bumpy ain't even in there," Spoke shouted. Cal's stomach turned to ice. Leon froze. Even Vito's smile widened like a wound opening. Spoke continued louder. "He ain't stupid. He sent y'all out here like dogs. He already moved. He's headed to Klein's church right now to hide the money." Cal's mind exploded. That was it. That was the betrayal. Spoke wasn't just leaking names. He was selling Bumpy's escape route in real time. Leon roared, "Shut your mouth!" But it was too late. Vito's face sharpened with purpose. "Klein's church," he repeated like savoring it. Then he turned to the Italian holding Cal. "Kill him," Vito said calmly. Cal's blood stopped. The Italian's gun pressed tighter. Cal's hand moved in his pocket, fingers touching the pistol, but before he could pull it, a voice cut through the night from behind Leon. Deep, controlled, not shouted. Bumpy's voice. Don't. Everyone froze again. Even the sniper paused like he was waiting for permission. Bumpy stepped out from the club entrance into the streetlight like a man stepping onto a stage. No hat, no rush, just that Harlem suit like armor, eyes flat and cold. Cal's chest tightened with relief until he saw what Bumpy was holding. Not a gun, not a knife. A small object wrapped in cloth. Bumpy lifted it slightly. Vito's eyes narrowed. What the hell is that? Bumpy didn't answer him. He spoke to Leon. Leon, Bumpy said quietly, move your men back. Now. Leon's face twisted with frustration. Bump. They got a sniper, I said, move them back. Leon obeyed. Because Bumpy's voice wasn't advice. It was law. Bumpy then looked at Vito. Chicago thinks it's clever, Bumpy said. Snipers. Traitors. Little boys held at gunpoint. Vito smirked. You stepped out, Johnson. That means you lose. Bumpy's eyes stayed calm. No, Bumpy said. It means you're about to understand something. Bumpy raised the cloth-wrapped object higher. Then he unwrapped it. Cal's stomach flipped. It was a metal box, small, wired, ugly. A homemade bomb. Vito's smirk faltered. Bumpy looked directly at Vito, voice soft as winter. You see this? Bumpy asked. This is what you came for. Vito's throat tightened. You wouldn't. Bumpy cut him off. I don't need to kill you, Bumpy said. I just need to make sure you never make it back to Capone. Vito's face drained of color, because now he understood. Bumpy wasn't trapped. Bumpy had baited this whole block. He had waited until Capone's men showed their card: sniper, traitor, hostage. And now Bumpy was holding the one thing that ended every plan. Chaos. Bumpy's eyes flicked to Spoke. Spoke, Bumpy said, voice gentle like a priest. Spoke smiled nervously. Bumpalus and I. Bumpy raised a hand. Don't talk, he said. Just walk closer. Spoke hesitated. Vito's men hesitated. Cal trembled, eyes wet. Then Bumpy said the sentence that turned the night into a nightmare. You all came to humiliate me. He nodded once. So I'm going to humiliate Chicago. And Bumpy's thumb moved toward the detonator wire, forcing everyone on that street to make the same decision Cal had been forced to make. Run or die. But the cruelest part? Cal looked down and realized the Italian still hadn't let him go. Meaning if Bumpy detonated, Cal would die too. So Cal understood the final twist. Bumpy's plan might save Harlem, but it could kill Calvin Briggs. And Bumpy looked straight at Cal as if asking him without words, are you willing to be the cost? Harlem, Friday, July 10th, 1931, 12:12 p.m. a.m. Cal couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he could see was Bumpy's hand hovering over that ugly little metal box, wires exposed like nerves. Capone's men stared at it like it was a coffin that had opened early. Vito's confidence gone. The Italian behind Cal finally moved, shifting his grip, trying to use Cal as a shield. But Bumpy didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He didn't shout. He looked at Cal like a man looking at a locked door. Then Bumpy spoke calm, almost tender. Cal, he said, step left when I say so. Cal's eyes widened. How he whispered. Bumpy didn't answer. Because the answer was simple. Bumpy had already calculated the only move that could save Cal and still break Chicago. Bumpy's gaze locked onto Vito. You tell Capone this, Bumpy said. Harlem doesn't get threatened. Harlem gets respected. Vito forced a laugh, but it came out thin. You think you can scare Chicago with fireworks? Bumpy's mouth twitched barely. These aren't fireworks, he said. Then Bumpy raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. Leon. Leon's eyes snapped up. Bumpy didn't look away from Vito. Kill the lights. Leon hesitated only a fraction, then whistled sharply. Two Harlem boys moved fast. A brick flew. The streetlight above the corner shattered and the block fell into a sudden violent darkness. In that instant, everything turned animal. The Italian behind Cal cursed and tightened his grip, and that was Cal's moment. Because Bumpy's voice cut through the dark like a razor. Now, Cal threw his body left. At the same time, a Harlem gun cracked. The Italian holding Cal jerked hard, his grip breaking as the bullet hit him low in the shoulder. Cal stumbled free, tumbling onto the sidewalk, scraping his palms raw. Gunfire erupted, but not wild. Controlled. Short bursts. Harlem wasn't spraying the street. They were hunting. Capone's men fired back blindly, shouting in Italian. Another shot rang higher, sharper. The sniper. But without the streetlight, the roof advantage vanished. The sniper fired again and missed. Then a scream cut the dark as Leon's men found him, someone dragged down off a fire escape like a sack of meat. Vito shouted, "Move! Move!" Car doors slammed. Engines roared. Men scrambled into the dark cars, desperate now, no longer predators, just survivors. Cal crawled behind a stoop, chest heaving, and looked up just in time to see Bumpy do the cruelest, smartest thing of the night. He didn't throw the bomb. He didn't detonate it. He simply rolled it slowly under the nearest Chicago car. Vito saw it. His voice cracked with panic. "No, get out!" Men dove out of the car like it was on fire. The car peeled forward anyway, driver terrified. Flooring it, and the bomb clinked harmlessly against the gutter. No explosion. No smoke. Just silence. A fake. A bluff. But it worked. Because Capone's men didn't know that. They fled the block like hunted animals, leaving one of their own bleeding, leaving the sniper captured, leaving their dignity in Harlem's gutter. Cal sat shaking, palms bleeding, eyes wet. He had lived, but the street had changed. Because Bumpy hadn't just protected Harlem. He had embarrassed Chicago in public, and men like Capone didn't forgive embarrassment. Bumpy walked to Cal slowly, crouched beside him, and spoke low. "You did good." Cal choked, "My mother." "The medicine." Bumpy's eyes held his. "You'll get it," Bumpy promised. Then Bumpy stood and looked down the dark street where Capone's cars disappeared. His voice dropped into something colder than anger. "Now," Bumpy murmured, "Capone's gonna send real killers." And Leon Holding spoke Mallory by the collar like a rag, dragged him into the streetlight spill from a nearby window. Spoke was crying now, begging. Bumpy didn't even look at him. He only asked one question, quiet and deadly. "Do we make it public, or do we make it permanent?" Harlem, Friday, July 10th, 1931, 12:38 p.m. a.m. By the time the last echoes of gunfire died, Harlem had already started whispering, not in daylight conversations, in backroom murmurs, in barbershops before sunrise, in the way men leaned in close and lowered their voices like they were talking about a ghost. Because Capone's boys had come into Harlem like they owned the night, and Harlem had sent them back empty. No contract, no victory, no message delivered, just fear. Cal sat on the club's back steps with his hands wrapped in cloth, blood soaked through anyway. Leon's men had cleaned the street, fast-moved bodies, wiped shells, dragged the wounded Italian into an alley where he couldn't be found until morning. That was Harlem discipline. Chicago left corpses as warnings. Harlem left mysteries. Inside the club, Bumpy stood at the window watching the block like it was chessboard territory. Leon paced, angry, restless, and spoke. Mallory, still alive, sat in a chair with his wrists tied behind him, eyes swollen from crying. "Bump," Leon said, voice rough. "Let me take him outside. 1 minute. That's all I need." Spoke shook his head violently. "Please, please, Leon." Bumpy didn't even glance at Spoke. Instead, Bumpy turned to Cal. "You got the envelope still?" Bumpy asked. Cal nodded weakly. "Yes, sir." "Good," Bumpy said. "You're finishing the delivery." Cal stared. "Now." Bumpy leaned closer, his voice softer, but sharper. "Now," he repeated. "Because the whole point is Harlem doesn't stop moving for Chicago." Cal's stomach tightened. "But they'll be waiting." Bumpy nodded once. "That's why you're not going alone." He waved a hand. 2 men stepped forward, older, harder looking, the kind who didn't need to show guns to be dangerous. "Escort him," Bumpy ordered. "Quiet." Cal rose on unsteady legs, fear crawling back into his throat. But as he moved toward the door, Bumpy stopped him with one more sentence. "And Cal," Bumpy said. Cal turned. Bumpy's eyes were steady. "If anyone stops you, you don't argue. You don't negotiate. Cal swallowed. You run. Bumpy finished. And you let Harlem handle the rest. Cal nodded, then left with the 2 escorts, disappearing into the night. Bumpy watched him. Goethe then finally turned to Spoke. Spoke tried to speak. Bumpy, listen, Capone, he threatened me. Bumpy walked to him slowly, like Spoke wasn't even human anymore. Then Bumpy leaned down close enough for Spoke to smell bourbon on his breath. You sold a boy for $50, Bumpy said quietly. Spoke sobbed. I was scared. Bumpy nodded slightly, like he understood. Then he straightened and looked at Leon. Bring me his coat, Bumpy said. Leon hesitated. His coat. Bumpy's voice stayed calm. His coat, he repeated. Leon ripped Spoke's coat off his shoulders. Spoke whimpered, shaking. Bumpy took the coat, reached into the inner pocket, and pulled out something folded. A paper. He opened it. Leon stepped closer to see. It was a list. Names. Locations. Routes. Harlem information written in neat handwriting. And at the bottom, a single number. $500. Leon's eyes widened. Bumpy's jaw tightened. Because now the truth was worse than betrayal. Spoke hadn't been paid $50 to sacrifice Cal. He'd been promised $500 to become Chicago's inside man. And suddenly the night made sense. The sniper, the trap, the timing, the humiliation attempt. It was all coordinated. Spoke was the key. Bumpy folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his own pocket. Then he looked at Leon. Get me the church elders, Bumpy said. And get me every Harlem captain I trust. Leon nodded. We going to war? Bumpy stared out the window toward the dark streets of Harlem, voice low. No, Bumpy said. He paused, eyes hard. We're going to make sure Chicago learns that when they step in Harlem. His voice dropped even colder. They don't step out the same. Leon swallowed and spoke. Bumpy finally looked down at Spoke, who was trembling like a child. Bumpy's answer was quiet. Spoke doesn't die tonight, he said. Spoke's eyes filled with hope until Bumpy finished. He's going to live long enough to tell Capone exactly what happened. Leon frowned. Why give Chicago that satisfaction? Bumpy smiled slightly. Because the story matters, he said. Capone wanted humiliation. He leaned in. So we're going to send him one. And with that, Bumpy turned away, already planning the next move. Because Harlem wasn't celebrating. Harlem was preparing. And somewhere in Chicago, when Capone heard the truth, he wouldn't send negotiators next time. He'd send men who didn't come back at all. Harlem, Friday, July 10th, 1931. 6:21 a.m. Dawn didn't feel like victory. It felt like the city holding its breath. Cal stood in Reverend Klein's small office behind the church, watching the preacher count money with shaking hands. The envelope was open now, cash stacked neatly like prayer didn't matter anymore. Klein finally nodded. This will keep things calm. Cal didn't answer. Because calm was a lie. Outside, Harlem was waking up. Shopkeepers lifted shutters. Kids ran to corner stores. Men in suits pretended they hadn't heard the night, but everyone had. Cal walked home with his escorts, hands still wrapped, chest still tight. On the stairs to his building, a boy ran past him shouting the rumor already spreading. Capone's men got played. They ran like rats. Cal reached his door and stopped cold. A small paper sack sat neatly on his welcome mat. Inside was a medicine bottle, a doctor's receipt, and a note in clean handwriting. Paid in full. Cal's throat tightened. Bumpy had kept his promise. But beneath the bottle was something else. A second note, no signature. Just 2 words. Next time. Cal stared at it for a long time before he understood. That note wasn't from Bumpy. It wasn't from Harlem. It was Chicago. Capone couldn't touch Bumpy easily. So he'd chosen the easier target. The boy who lived. Cal picked up the medicine and stepped inside like a man suddenly older than his years. Because Bumpy hadn't just humiliated Al Capone. He'd made Calvin Briggs a name Chicago wouldn't forget. And in Harlem, that kind of attention wasn't fame. It was a death sentence waiting for the right night.